Hello and welcome to Maxim Foods Inside Track. Firstly, before I start, a big shout out to the central, northern and northern Victorian areas, both the dairy community obviously and beyond that, the whole community doing it very tough down there. Our thoughts are with you and I hope things improve quickly. Having a look at dairy conditions, so much similar to last fortnight, there is bearish sentiment in the market as demand conditions continue to wane. Obviously over the last 18 months, during COVID and post-COVID, with vessel disruptions, increased general demand, people buying forward just to make sure they have stock, we saw an upward trajectory of pricing. We've since seen in the last 2 months a bit of a correction on that. In terms of supply side of things, if we're looking at whole milk powder for starters, whole milk powder in New Zealand, they haven't had the best start to the season milk collection wise against last year, so there's not an abundance of stock. However, demand waning has leveled that out a bit and we've seen a bit of a dip in pricing. In terms of an Australian product, because it isn't the preferred mix for processors in terms of return, we won't see any Australian whole milk being produced, very little whole milk being produced of Australian origin this year. So therefore, you'll see mainly New Zealand product in the Aussie market. In terms of a short to medium term outlook on whole milk, we still see bearish sentiment in the market. The Australian dollar isn't helping things, so whatever market price relief the manufacturers are getting is swallowed up by a weak Aussie dollar at about 63 today. So yeah, it's tricky conditions for the whole milk powder buyers at the moment because any relief they're getting in the market is offset by a weak Aussie dollar. Having a look at skim milk powder, so traditionally over the last 18 months, skim milk powder has been the champion commodity or dairy commodity, so it's outperformed a lot of people's expectations. So we did see a lot of concentration of processors making a butter skim mix, so with that you see an increase in supply, and then we've started to see, with that increase in supply, a wane in demand. We've seen a little bit of a drop in price point. So yeah, it's corrected itself a bit. Once again, like the full cream milk powder, a weak Aussie dollar for imported US, EU or New Zealand skim, it doesn't help the manufacturers or the skim buyers cause, because once again the dip in commodity price is offset by that exchange rate. But in terms of a 3 to 6 month outlook on skim, we still think it'll be relatively flat with pretty bearish signs out there in the market in terms of demand. Butter and AMF. So butter and AMF supply side of things have been relatively good in New Zealand, EU and the US. US pricing is still the highest in terms of the global regions, and it seems moderately stable at the moment. EU pricing as well is still well above New Zealand and Australian pricing. In terms of New Zealand, the supply seems okay. Much like in Australia, much like the full cream, there's not a lot of industrial butter getting around, mainly chewed up into the retail sector. So yeah, we still see butter pricing, although seeing a little bit of a dip in the GDT last night, we still see that relatively firm, and we think the outlook over the next 3 to 6 months is a flat to sort of up outlook in terms of butterfat pricing. Having a look at cheese now. So in the US, you see a relatively flat market. Demand seems to be holding up okay in the domestic market, so pricing remains relatively flat. In uncertain economic conditions, we see the likes of mozzarella, cheese, standard cheddar, etc. are a bit more recession-proof, or if you like. So we still see demand holding up in the US. In the EU, the same. A bit more pressure on EU pricing, which has been very high in the last 3 months. So that may see an effect on demand, and you may see pricing wane a little in the EU. And that is a similar story to Australia and NZ. So as we see these higher prices work through the supply chain, we may see a bit of a dip off in demand. So that could rebalance things and may see a little easing in pricing on the cheese front. Finishing off with whey powder. So whey powder, or sweet whey powder, we've seen a relatively low pricing for the last 2 to 3 months. So coming off a lowish base, pricing remains relatively stable. So probably seeing a little bit of an upward inflection in demand. So we may see pricing creep up on sweet whey. With WPC, or whey protein concentrate, we've seen a pretty bearish market in terms of demand. It's been a very strong or quick trajectory of higher pricing there over the last 18 months. So we're seeing a little bit of correction in WPC. In WPI, demand still remains relatively good. So that balance remains in check. So pricing's still high. Thanks very much for listening. Be kind, stay well, and we'll see you again in a fortnight.